Listen closely. The story of Africa's ancient and medieval kingdoms is not a side note to world history. It is one of its beating hearts. Empires rose from desert trade routes. Cities glittered with libraries and gold, and stone palaces looked out to oceans busy with ships from Arabia, India, and beyond. From the Nile to the Niger, from the Red Sea to the Atlantic, rulers forged states that were sophisticated, wealthy, and deeply connected to the wider world. This is a guided journey across 2,000 years, following the power lines that tied Africa together long before modern borders. Before the empire's landscapes, migrations, and metals, to understand the kingdoms, start with the land. North of the equator, the Sahara is vast, but it wasn't always a barrier. In deep prehistory, it was greener, dotted with lakes and grasslands that supported herding communities. As the climate dried, people clustered along reliable water and corridors of movement the Nile Valley. The Sahelian belt south of the Sahara and the Indian Ocean rim of East Africa. Geography forged opportunity. The Nile provided annual floods and a river highway. The Sahel offered grasslands fit for caravans. The East African coast open to the monsoon winds of trade. Meanwhile, a set of slow motion revolutions unfolded. Across much of sub-Saharan Africa, farmers and ironworkers, often associated with the long, branching stream of Bantu language speakers, spread gradually from Central Africa toward the south and east. Far to the west, in today's Nigeria, the Nok culture pioneered ironworking and produced striking terracotta sculpture. Iron changed everything. Better tools meant more food. More food meant more people. And more people could build cities and states. Add one more innovation: the camel. Introduced into North Africa in late antiquity, the one-humped dromedary could carry heavy loads across the desert. By the early centuries of the first millennium CE, caravans stitched the Sahara to the Mediterranean, moving salt, copper, cloth, and gold. Trade routes became arteries for power. Kingdoms of the Nile Kerma, Kush, and the Nubian pharaohs long before the medieval age. The Nile north-south corridor nurtured some of Africa's earliest states. South of Egypt, in Nubia, modern Sudan, the kingdom of Kerma flourished in the second millennium BCE. Later, the kingdom of Kush rose in the same region, first centered at Napata and then at Meroe. Kush's rulers were not Egypt's shadows. They were its rivals, neighbors, and, at times, its conquerors. In the 8th century BCE, Nubian kings swept north, controlling Egypt as its 25th dynasty. They presented themselves as restorers of order, patrons of temples, and defenders of the Nile's cultural unity. Their pyramids, smaller and steeper than Egypt's Old Kingdom giants, still prickle the Sudanese sands. Material proof that African royal traditions did not end at Egypt's southern border. As centuries turned, Meroe became Kush's beating heart. The city forged iron on an industrial scale and developed its own script. Its queens, the Kandakes, ruled with authority. One of them, Amenarinas, famously fought Rome around the turn of the first millennium BCE, defending Nubian independence against an empire that stretched from Spain to Syria. Meroe eventually waned in the 4th century CE. But the Nile corridor did not fall silent. Christian Nubian kingdoms, Nobatia, Makuria, and Alodia, emerged later, building cathedrals, painting vivid murals, and negotiating their place between Egypt and the Horn of Africa for centuries. Knowledge, faith, and power. The texture of African states. States are more than kings and armies. They are systems of meaning. Across Africa's kingdoms, religion and politics braided tightly. In the Nile and Ethiopian highlands, Christianity supported sacred kingship and monastic learning. In the Sahel and the Swahili cities, Islam's legal traditions and literacy underwrote contracts, taxation, diplomacy, and scholarship. In the forest kingdoms, divine kingship and ancestral cults grounded authority and social harmony. Education flourished in many forms. Griots memorized lineages, epics, and laws, ensuring that history was a living performance. In Timbuktu and Djenne, scholars compiled manuscripts on theology, astronomy, medicine, and commerce. In Aksum and later Ethiopian kingdoms, scribes illuminated gospels in Jaiz. Knowledge was not a luxury, it was infrastructure. Women, too, shaped power. Nubia's candaques demonstrated that queens could command armies and diplomacy. In the Sahel and forest zones, royal mothers and queen mothers, like the Ioba of Benin, wielded influence in succession and council. Beyond royal courts, women dominated certain markets and guilds, acting as crucial nodes in the economy. Trade as a spine, gold, salt, and ideas. Everywhere we look, trade is the spine. Sahelian empires taxed the exchange of gold for Saharan salt, an essential preservative and dietary need. The Sahara was not an empty obstacle, but a highway for camels, led by Berber and Arab merchants who carried not only goods, but also ideas, Islam, new crops, bookkeeping, and technologies. On the Red Sea and Indian Ocean, monsoon rhythms powered predictable shipping seasons, allowing merchants to plan and scale. In the interior, local markets tied farmers, smiths, herders, and artisans into bigger systems. Copper moved from Central African mines to the Sahel. Beads and cloth traveled in the other direction. Enslaved people, tragic but historically central, were moved along many of these routes, reshaping communities and states. The result was an Africa crisscrossed by routes as complex as Europe's medieval roads or Asia's silk and spice networks. These arteries fed courts and cities, funded armies and mosques, and created cosmopolitan worlds where a traveler might hear half a dozen languages in a single market day. The end of an era, and what endures. By the late 16th century, the medieval pattern had begun to change. The Moroccan invasion of Songhai in 1591 shattered Sahelian hegemony. In the east, Portuguese ships probed the Swahili coast, sometimes trading, sometimes burning, beginning a new era of Atlantic and Indian Ocean rivalries. In Central Africa, new commercial circuits formed around Atlantic ports. Yet, the institutions built in the ancient and medieval centuries did not vanish. City plans, legal customs, royal rituals, artisan guilds, and scholarly lineages rolled forward into the early modern period, even as the world around them shifted. If there's one lesson in this sweep of history, it is this: Africa's kingdoms were not peripheral copies of distant civilizations. They were autonomous engines of creativity, plugged into the world on their own terms. Their rulers experimented with the art of governing diverse peoples. Their builders invented forms that answered local climates and beliefs. Their merchants and scholars made the desert a bridge and the ocean a boulevard. Why this past matters. Now call this a complete history. And you risk arrogance. No single telling can exhaust these worlds. But the outline is clear. African ancient and medieval kingdoms were dynamic, literate, wealthy, and inventive. They were not frozen in oral tradition alone, nor defined by outside powers. They made their own choices, solved their own problems, and contributed to global systems of trade, religion, and knowledge. When you picture the medieval world, put Timbuktu's libraries beside Europe's monasteries. Set Great Zimbabwe's walls beside the castles of Europe. Hear the call to prayer in Kilwa alongside church bells. In Lalibela, imagine caravans in the desert and dhows on the ocean, griots and scholars, queens and generals. That is the fuller map. That is the world as it was. And now you've walked it, from Nile pyramids to coral mosques, from savanna capitals to stone cities in the southern hills. The next time someone says Africa entered history, only recently, you'll know better. Africa wrote history on stone and skin, in song and script, long before the modern age.